Hello everyone, and welcome to my Bold and Beautiful for You channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The electric tension that had been crackling through the Forrester Creations CEO office for weeks, a palpable force field of unresolved history and rekindled hope, seemed to shatter into a million glittering, painful shards with those 5 quiet, devastating words from Ridge Forrester: "I can't do this again." The statement, hanging in the air between them like a funeral shroud, was not delivered with the fiery anger that had characterized so many of their past confrontations, but with a profound, bone-deep exhaustion that was somehow far more final. Taylor Hayes, ever the optimist, the brilliant psychiatrist who could diagnose the entire world's traumas yet remained perpetually blind to the cyclical tragedy of her own heart, felt the hopeful smile freeze and then die on her lips. Her proposal, a brave, vulnerable leap of faith born from what she perceived as their recent, undeniable connection, a connection that had felt like the restoration of a sacred, decades-old promise, had not been met with the joyous, relieved embrace she had envisioned during her countless sleepless nights. Instead, it was met with this, a quiet, paternal pity in Ridge's eyes that was 1,000 times worse than any shouted insult. He stood there, a monument to conflicted desire, his broad shoulders, usually squared against the world, now slumped under the invisible weight of his own indecision, the very same indecision that had ping-ponged his heart between the two women for over 3 decades. For Taylor, this moment was a nauseating echo of 100 other rejections, a record stuck on a skip of romantic ruin, and the again in his sentence was the needle digging into the groove, reminding her that her entire adult life could be summarized as a series of near misses and almost was moments with this man. She had been his safe harbor, his moral compass, the good woman he was supposed to be with, the one who healed him, stood by him, and yet, time and again, he found himself pulled by the siren song of chaos, by the tumultuous, all-consuming, and endlessly complicated love he shared with Brooke Logan. The air, thick with the scent of expensive aftershave and the faint, floral notes of Taylor's perfume, now felt suffocating, each molecule heavy with the ghosts of their shared past. The wedding vows exchanged under sunny skies, the joy of raising their children, Steffi and Thomas, the devastating pain of her death, and the miraculous, almost divine second chance they had been granted. In Taylor's mind, all of that history was a foundation upon which they could finally, build a lasting future, a testament to a love that could literally cheat death itself. But in Ridge's mind, that same history was a labyrinth with no exit, a chronicle of pain he had both inflicted and endured, and the prospect of stepping back onto that familiar path, only to potentially cause another catastrophic derailment, filled him with a kind of existential dread. He looked at her, this beautiful, accomplished, and fundamentally good woman who loved him with a steadfast loyalty he knew he scarcely deserved, and he knew that saying yes would be the easier, kinder path in the short term. It would make her happy, it would please their children who had long championed their reunion, and it would provide a semblance of the stability he often craved. But it would also be a lie, not a lie of malice, but a lie of omission, an omission of the restless, unsettled feeling that still churned in his gut whenever he thought of Brooke, whenever he saw her smile, whenever he remembered the feel of her in his arms. He couldn't marry Taylor while the ghost of Brooke Logan still held the deed to his soul, and he was finally, painfully self-aware enough to admit that to himself, even if he couldn't find the words to make Taylor understand without destroying her completely. "I can't do this again, Taylor," he repeated, his voice low and gravelly, as if the words were being torn from a place deep within his chest. "I can't stand in front of our family and friends, make those promises again, look into your eyes and swear forever," when, his voice trailed off, but the unspoken conclusion echoed in the silent room, "when we both know where my heart ultimately wanders. When we both know that forever for us has always been a temporary condition." He reached out a hand, perhaps to offer comfort, but Taylor flinched back as if his touch were searing hot, the movement sharp and full of a fresh, raw pain that made him feel like a monster. "This isn't about you," he insisted, falling back on the oldest, most cliched line in the brokenhearted's playbook, a line that was both true and a profound falsehood. "It's about me. It's about this pattern we're in. We try, we think it's destiny, and then something happens, and I break us. I break you. I can't be the reason for that pain in your eyes again, Taylor. I won't. His confession was meant to be an absolution, a way to shoulder the blame, but to Taylor, it sounded like a coward's excuse, a preemptive apology for a betrayal he had not yet committed but was already certain was inevitable. It was an admission that, in his heart, the failure of their relationship was a foregone conclusion, and what kind of foundation for a marriage was that? What kind of love was so fragile that it had to be preemptively euthanized to save it from future suffering? Meanwhile, just a few offices away, the universe, with its impeccable sense of dramatic timing, was ensuring that the shockwaves of this personal earthquake would be felt on multiple fronts. Brooke Logan, the so-called destiny in this eternal triangle, had chosen that precise moment to come see Ridge, a spring in her step and a hopeful, almost girlish smile on her face. The recent weeks had been a period of cautious détente between them. The constant warfare that had defined their interactions for months had cooled into a respectful, even warm, camaraderie. They had shared laughs over their grandson, Hayes, found common ground in their concern for their daughter, Hope, and in those quiet, unguarded moments, Brooke had allowed herself to remember the man she fell in love with, not the scowling adversary he had become. She had been mentally composing a speech about second chances, or was it their 100th chance, and the possibility of finding their way back to each other, truly back, without the interference of outside forces or their own stubborn pride. Pushing the heavy oak door to his outer office open, she was about to call his name, her voice light and teasing, when the scene through the partially open inner door stopped her dead in her tracks. She saw the tableau, Ridge, his back to her, his posture radiating a defeat so complete it was unnerving, and Taylor, facing her, the raw, unfiltered agony on the other woman's face telling a story more eloquent than any script. Brooke didn't need to hear the specifics, the context was painted in the brutal clarity of their body language. This was a rejection. A profound one. And the stunned expression on her own face, which would have been a gift to any paparazzo lurking outside, was a complex cocktail of emotions. There was no triumphant gloating, no smug satisfaction that her rival had been thwarted. Instead, a shocking, unexpected pang of sympathy for Taylor lanced through her, followed immediately by a dizzying, terrifying surge of hope, a hope she immediately tried to quash, knowing it was inappropriate and dangerous. But it was there, stubborn and undeniable. If Ridge was rejecting Taylor's overture, whatever it had been, did that mean the door she had believed was slammed shut and bolted was now, slightly ajar? Her hand flew to her mouth, not in a performative gesture, but to physically stifle the gasp that threatened to escape, her mind racing, recalibrating the entire landscape of their futures in the span of a single, stolen, clandestine glance. The spoilers were right, Brooke was utterly stunned, not just by the scene itself, but by the seismic shift it represented in the endless, wearying war for Ridge Forrester's heart, a war she had thought, just moments ago, she had irrevocably lost. The silence in the wake of Ridge's rejection was not merely an absence of sound, it was a physical entity, thick and suffocating, pressing in on Taylor from all sides, making the air in the lavish, art-adorned office feel thin and unbreathable. She could hear the frantic, panicked drum of her own heartbeat in her ears, a staccato rhythm that mocked the steady, confident pulse she had felt just minutes before when she had entered this room, her future seemingly as solid and gleaming as the polished mahogany of his desk. Her proposal, a moment she had played out in her head with the rose-tinted lens of a lifetime of love, had been a carefully constructed speech, woven with threads of their shared history, their youth, their family, their resilience in the face of her death, and the miracle of their reunion. She had spoken of closure, of new beginnings, of finally laying the ghost of Brooke Logan to rest for good, and in his eyes, she had seen not agreement, but a flicker of something that she had mistaken for tender resolve. How could she have been so blind? How could a world-renowned psychiatrist, a woman who had navigated the most complex labyrinths of the human mind, be so utterly, catastrophically inept at reading the one heart that had ever truly mattered to her? The again he uttered was the cruelest part, a single word that reduced a 30-year epic of love, loss, and redemption to a tiresome, repetitive cycle, a scratched record of romantic failure where she was always, inevitably, the one left holding the needle. It wasn't just a rejection of a marriage proposal, it was a rejection of her entire narrative, her understanding of their love story as one of destiny and divine intervention. He was telling her that their epic was, in fact, a tragedy, and he was tired of playing his part. Ridge watched the devastation unfold on her face, and it felt like a physical blow. He saw the light in her brilliant eyes, a light that had guided him through so many dark periods, extinguish, leaving behind a flat, hollowed-out devastation that was worse than any tears. He wanted to explain, to make her see that this was an act of mercy, not cruelty. How could he make her understand the chilling clarity that had washed over him as she spoke? The vision of another wedding, another exchange of vows, another hopeful beginning, only to be followed by the inevitable, slow-motion car crash of his own wandering heart? He saw the future with terrifying precision, the initial happiness, the subtle cracks, the lingering glances he'd cast towards Brooke at family gatherings, the arguments that would start with "you're thinking about her, aren't you?" and end with slammed doors and shattered trust. He would destroy her, piece by piece, and in the process, destroy the last vestiges of respect and friendship they managed to salvage. He was a man built for passion, for conflict, for the tumultuous fire of a connection that refused to die, even when it burned him. The serene, stable love Taylor offered, the love he should want, the love he tried to want, felt like a beautiful, gilded cage. Saying yes would be a betrayal of her, of himself, and of the inconvenient, maddening, and undeniable truth that his soul, for better or worse, was irrevocably tethered to Brooke's. "You deserve more than a man who is only half present," he murmured, his voice raw. "You deserve a man who can give you his whole heart, without reservation. Not one who has to constantly check over his shoulder, fighting a battle he's already lost." He was handing her the blame, painting himself as the flawed, unworthy party, a classic Forrester self-flagellation tactic designed to soften the blow, but it rang hollow. It was the truth, yes, but it was a truth that offered her no solace, only the confirmation of her deepest insecurity, that she, for all her perfection, would never be enough to fully exorcise the specter of Brooke Logan. Outside the door, Brooke remained frozen, a statue of conflicted emotion. The initial, instinctual surge of hope was now being tempered by a wave of cold, hard realism. This changed everything, and yet, it changed nothing. A Ridge free from Taylor was a Ridge susceptible to his own demons, a Ridge who would now be grappling with guilt and loneliness, a potent cocktail that often led him straight to her doorstep. But was that what she wanted? To be the rebound, the consolation prize he ran to when his logical choice fell apart? She thought of their daughter, Hope, and the complex, often painful lessons Hope had learned about loving a Forrester man. Was Brooke, a woman in her mature years, still doomed to repeat the same naive patterns of her youth? She saw the absolute wreckage on Taylor's face, and a profound sense of sisterhood, forged in the fires of their shared torment over the same man for decades, momentarily overrode her competitive instinct. She knew that look. She had worn that look herself, in this very office, in her own home, more times than she could count. It was the look of a woman whose entire world had just been invalidated by a single sentence from Ridge Forrester. Part of her wanted to burst in, to confront Ridge, to demand to know what he had done to cause such pain. But another, more pragmatic part held her back. Her intrusion would only humiliate Taylor further and put Ridge on the defensive, twisting the situation into a three-way confrontation when it needed to be a moment of painful, private closure. Back inside the office, Taylor finally found her voice, though it was a broken, strained version of it. "So, that's it," she whispered, the words scraping out of her throat. "All of this, our recent connection, our talks about the future, about being a team, that was just, what? You passing the time? Filling a void until you figured out your next move?" There was no accusation in her tone now, only a desperate, bewildered need for understanding. "I thought we were building something real, Ridge. I thought we were finally on the same page." Ridge closed his eyes, pained. "It was real, Taylor. Every moment of it. That's what makes this so damn hard. But wanting something to be right, doesn't make it right. Loving you, and God, I do love you, it's just not the same as being in love with the idea of a life that I can't fully commit to." It was the most honest and, therefore, the most brutal thing he could have said. He was distinguishing between a love of comfort, history, and deep affection, and the all-consuming, often destructive, passionate love that defined his connection to Brooke. He was telling her she was the former, and in doing so, he was dismantling the very foundation of her belief system. Taylor nodded slowly, a terrible, chilling calm settling over her features. The tears that had been welling in her eyes did not fall, they seemed to retreat, frozen by a sudden, glacial resolve. "I see," she said, her voice now frighteningly steady. "I finally see. I have spent a lifetime being your safe harbor, your what if. I have been the placeholder for Brooke Logan. And I am done." She took a step back, creating a chasm between them that felt infinitely wider than the physical space. "I won't be again, Ridge. This is the last time. You have made your choice, even if you're too cowardly to run to her right now. You have chosen the possibility of her over the reality of me. And you will have to live with that." With a dignity that shattered Ridge's heart more effectively than any hysterics could have, she turned and walked out of his office, her head held high, leaving him alone with the echoing silence and the devastating weight of his decision, a decision that had just irrevocably altered the course of 3 lives, sending shockwaves that would ripple through Forrester Creations, their families, and the very fabric of their tangled destinies for weeks and months to come. The spoiler was not just a headline, it was a prophecy, and in its wake, Brooke remained in the hallway, stunned, hopeful, and terrified of what this new, volatile chapter would bring. The soft click of the office door closing behind Taylor was a sound more final and deafening than any slam could have been. It was the period at the end of their sentence, the gentle, precise closure of a chapter that had spanned a lifetime. Ridge stood motionless, staring at the space she had just vacated, the ghost of her perfume, a sophisticated, clinical scent so different from Brooke's warm, floral notes, still haunting the air, a poignant reminder of the profound goodness he had just willingly, agonizingly, cast aside. His own words, "I can't do this again," echoed in the cavern of his skull, and for the first time, he truly dissected their meaning. It wasn't just about the weddings, the public spectacles of commitment that inevitably crumbled. It was about the private, intimate betrayals that followed, the distant look in his eyes during a conversation, the hesitation in his touch, the way his mind would wander to another woman during moments that should have been sacred to the two of them. He was protecting her from the monster he knew he could become, the man who, in a moment of weakness or passion, would shatter her world because a part of him would always belong to another. This rejection was, in his mind, his one truly selfless act in their entire tumultuous history. It was the ultimate proof of his love for her, a love so deep he was willing to let her go to save her from the slower, more painful destruction he would inevitably bring. This narrative of noble sacrifice began to solidify in his mind, a balm for the searing guilt, transforming his cowardice into a twisted form of courage. Out in the hallway, Brooke remained paralyzed, a spectator to the second act of this private tragedy. She watched as Taylor emerged, and the sight stole the breath from her lungs. This was not the broken, weeping woman she had expected. This was a phoenix forged in the fires of a final, ultimate humiliation. Taylor's stride was not a retreat, it was a march. Her jaw was set, her eyes fixed on a point far down the corridor, seeing nothing and no one, least of all Brooke, who shrank back into the shadows, feeling like a voyeur to a sacred grief. There were no tears, only a terrifying, granite-like resolve. This, Brooke realized with a jolt of fear, was a far more dangerous Taylor than the one who had pleaded with Ridge moments before. This was a woman who had finally, after 30 years, reached her absolute limit. The hope that Brooke had felt flicker to life now sputtered with uncertainty. A Taylor who was emotionally vulnerable and heartbroken was a known quantity, she could be comforted, reasoned with, even outmaneuvered. But a Taylor who was ice-cold and terminally done? That was an unpredictable variable, a force of nature who no longer had anything left to lose in the war for Ridge's heart, and was therefore, for the first time, truly free. Brooke's own hope suddenly felt naive, a childish fantasy that failed to account for the nuclear fallout of what had just transpired. Inside his office, Ridge's self-imposed martyrdom was short-lived. The silence began to press in on him, the emptiness of the room a stark contrast to the fullness of his turmoil. He turned and poured a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid catching the light from the window overlooking the Los Angeles skyline. He drank it in one burning swallow, willing it to numb the sharp edges of his conscience. But it only seemed to heighten them. He saw the reflection of his own face in the dark glass of a framed award, a man in his prime, a leader in his industry, yet perpetually a boy trapped between two mothers, two ideals, two versions of himself. Taylor represented order, integrity, the straight and narrow path. Brooke was chaos, passion, the thrilling, dangerous detour. He craved the former but was addicted to the latter. His phone buzzed on the desk, a text from Steffi, his daughter, Taylor's daughter. It was a simple, innocent photo of his grandson, Hayes. The image was a sucker punch. He had not just rejected Taylor, he had rejected the cohesive family unit Steffi and Thomas had always dreamed of for their parents. He had chosen the path that would inevitably bring more drama, more conflict, more pain into all their lives. The weight of his decision was no longer just emotional, it was dynastic. He was the patriarch, and his personal indecision was a fault line that threatened the entire Forrester empire. Brooke, gathering her courage and a semblance of composure, knew she could no longer linger in the hallway. She had to either retreat and process this seismic shift in private, or advance and confront the epicenter. Her heart, that treacherous, hopeful organ, chose for her. She took a shaky breath, smoothed her dress, and knocked softly on Ridge's door before she could lose her nerve. His gruff what, from the other side was all the invitation she received. She pushed the door open to find him standing with his back to her, staring out the vast window, his silhouette a picture of profound isolation. The air was thick with the scent of whiskey and regret. "Ridge," she said, her voice gentle, carefully devoid of the triumphant tone she knew would be catastrophic. He didn't turn around. "Not now, Brooke." The dismissal was weary, not angry. It was the voice of a man who had just fought a war with himself and lost, no matter the outcome. But Brooke, ever the warrior in this endless battle, took a step forward. I saw Taylor leave." She looked. She searched for the right word, one that wouldn't betray her eavesdropping. Upset. This finally made him turn. His eyes were haunted, shadowed with a pain that was both familiar and newly profound. "Upset doesn't begin to cover it," he said, his voice gravelly. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and in his gaze, she saw the entire, exhausting history of their love affair. He didn't need to say what had happened, the story was written in the slump of his shoulders, the defensive set of his jaw. "She asked me to marry her," he stated flatly, the words a confession. "And I told her no." He waited, watching her, his entire being a question mark. This was the moment. This was the crack in the door, the invitation she had been waiting for. But the expression on Brooke's face was not one of unadulterated joy. It was a complex map of sympathy, understanding, caution, and that stubborn, relentless flicker of hope. She walked closer, stopping a few feet from him, the space between them charged with 3 decades of history. "Oh, Ridge," she whispered, her voice full of a genuine empathy that surprised even her. "Why?" It was the only question that mattered. His answer would tell her everything, whether this was a true ending, or merely the prelude to another agonizing, beautiful, and destructive beginning in the forever war for the soul of Ridge Forrester. The spoilers had set the stage, but the next, unscripted line was his, and the future of 3 legends hung in the balance.